Today on the Transplant Helper, we discuss the topic, the emotional experience, where we're going to be talking about all the floods of emotions that come across us both pre and post transplant. Stay tuned. Hey folks, I appreciate you joining me today on the Transplant Helper podcast / YouTube video series. My name is Jim Burrell. Today's topic of discussion is the emotional experience. And what I mean by that are what are the floods of emotions that you and I might feel pre or post transplant. Now, obviously, I'm gaining a lot of this from my own life, from my own experience, both pre and post transplant. But I'm getting a lot of this information likewise from a survey I did on some Facebook groups the other day, which I'm going to show on the screen right now, by the way, where I got an overwhelming amount of response where people were trying to answer the question, what emotions have you felt pre or post transplant? You can see right here on the screen I received a number of answers to that question. So basically I've taken those answers along beside what I've experienced, along beside what I've discussed with patients on a regular basis face to face, and narrowed it down to this list that we're going to be discussing today, hopefully, and maybe on one other occasion. We'll just see how time goes for that. But nonetheless, let's jump right into this. Now, let me say as a disclaimer that most of these emotions will be kind of universally experienced. However, there will be some of them you'll look at and say, hey, I've never dealt with that. And that's probably the case. We are very different. All of our cases are different nonetheless. But if you've experienced these, you're probably going to say, yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm dealing with that now, or at least have in the past, or it may be that you will in the future. Now, let's jump right in the list. And I'll say that many of these are going to seem negative, but you'll understand why as I discuss them, and I'll try to give examples of each from my life and from the lives of others to help you to understand them. Number one, one of the major things I see in most all of us is the sense of either fear, panic, terror, as someone put it on the Facebook group, or anxiety. And I think this is pretty much universal. When you're first told, for example, like I was, when I was first told, Jim, you're going to be facing heart transplant, that was something I did not want to hear. Now, as a congenital patient, one who grew up with heart problems all of my life, I knew that this was going to be a possibility in my future. As a matter of fact, the doctors had predicted it. They had told me over time, this is what's going to happen in your life. This is where you're going to end up. But yet still, when I woke up from a heart cath on that date and doctors were standing by my bed saying, we have no more options, this is your only option left, you need a heart transplant, it scared me to death. And I was terrified, as someone put it. And I think that's pretty well universal. None of us are ready to face these things, no matter what the situation's been building up to it. And I also realized that many of us as transplant patients, many that I've met with, are meeting with their situation, will be needing heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, pancreas, whatever it is, by some sudden event. For example, a heart attack. For example, someone coming down with some sort of a virus or some sort of illness, and that caused these organs to fail, and then they're hit in the face with this, if you will. So, of course, we're going to be scared to death. And that may continue on for quite a while. It may continue on all the way up to the point of surgery like it did for me. I can remember the anxiety surrounding the day of surgery when I was told, you may have a potential match. And I thought to myself, when they put me on that gurney to roll me back into the OR, I'll probably get so scared I'll jump off and run. And I didn't do that, obviously, but I felt like I would. And it can even carry on throughout post-transplant, where you're still, just afraid. You're afraid of day-to-day living. You're afraid of missing medication. You're afraid of doing something wrong that might harm your body and such. But fear is probably one of the most universal, if you will, emotions that we're ever going to face. So I think fear, terror, panic, anxiety, all kind of grouped into one, most of us experience. Number two, I want to put out beside that the feelings of being overwhelmed, numbed, or confused. Now, I received the majority of these on that Facebook group, but I also, when I saw them, I thought, yep, that's exactly what I see. That's exactly what I've experienced, More times than not, especially when I meet with a patient face to face, that's what I sense right out of the gate, right off the bat. I sat down with a new patient, someone I maybe even never met with before. I'm kind of introducing myself, trying to find out a little bit about them, and I can just see it in their eyes. Or maybe they even say it. You know what? I don't know what to think right now. I'm just so overwhelmed. As someone told me one time, I just feel numb. I don't even have feelings at this point. And I think, again, that news that brings on the fear and anxiety also brings this sense, because so many patients are in the position they are, suddenly, or at least without the ability to be educated about their condition or about those potential transplants. There's no other way to feel. And so being confused, not knowing what's next, not knowing what the outcomes are and what the life potentials are for you, and how is this going to impact or improve your life, if it will even improve your life in the future. All those emotions can be felt. So that's kind of another subgroup to this, being overwhelmed, numb, or confused. And then the next one might surprise you, but I saw this on a Facebook group. Again, I've experienced it, so I want to share it with you. And that's the emotion of being angry or mad. I can remember, again, at the time of my first being told that I needed a transplant, how angry that made me, how mad I got, because I thought to myself, you know what, you've lived, at this point in my life at least, you've lived, Jim, and for 30 some odd years and done so well. What's gone wrong? What have you done, or what have you not done, or why do you deserve this? And it just made me angry. And I can remember, kind of boiling over that anger on my friends and my family members, especially my wife and my children. I just didn't know what to think, so you just kind of let that overflow with anger, and that anger can turn toward the doctors. It can turn toward the transplant team, making accusation that they don't know what they're doing, or they don't know really how to deal with you, and maybe they've misdiagnosed you and all of that. Again, that was kind of my feeling at the time, thinking, you've missed something here. I'm not the sick man you think I am. I'm not dying like you think I am. I don't need this transplant. Again, that's a typical, and I think kind of a average emotion. Now, you may not have experienced that, but some of us, many of us even maybe, do. So I think anger comes in there. In the next category, I guess maybe the fourth category here, there's the sense of anticipation. Now, anticipation can be positive or negative, depending on how you look at it. In my case, I think it's a little bit more positive than negative, but it's just, okay, I've been diagnosed with this. I've been told I need the transplant. Maybe you made your way onto the list at that point after being evaluated, and you're just kind of in the waiting. You're just kind of sitting back, counting the days off a calendar, just a little bit worrisome about it, but just anticipating what's to come, as I did at that point in time. That's when I was probably hot on the heels of YouTube, maybe like you are right now. I was researching and studying and watching every video and reading every article and putting my hands on everything I could to try to be educated about my situation, just trying to anticipate or to look for the future. Now, again, anticipation probably brings some apprehensiveness, and more times than not, the more videos I watch, the more uncomfortable I got, the more stressed I got. But I think it's kind of a universal thing, again, that many of us experience that. Now, number 5, again, kind of like anger may surprise you, and that is I began to notice a feeling of selfishness. Now, again, selfishness from one standard, because when you get to a point of needing a transplant, again, regardless of the type of transplant you need, that's obviously because you're very ill. You're very, very sick. And so it's not that hard to begin to have that pity party and begin to think, what, all eyes ought to be on me. All concerns, all discussions, all prayers, all whatever need to be on me, and I'm the only one that matters right now. And if someone's attention turns in a different direction from you, or someone seems to not express toward you the level of concern that they ought, or the pity for that matter that they ought, sometimes that just makes things worse for you, and you begin to realize, as I did, how selfish I could become over a period of time. Let me add a different level to this, and many people don't either think about this or don't admit it. You get to a point, especially as you get sicker and sicker, if that's the way to say that, where you begin to actually wait on that donor to the extent, in my case, as it was a heart, there had to be a deceased donor, and other organs are like that too, but there had to be a deceased donor to where you're so selfish you almost want someone to die. Now, don't take that wrong. Please don't take that too far. We'll explain more about it later, but I can remember being at one point, and this was just for a time, but being at a place in my life where I wanted to live so badly for my wife, for my children, for myself, that we began to actually, and we live in a small community where rarely, if ever, did you hear the life flight helicopters go over. And if you did, that was because there had been a terrible accident or a terrible, situation. We began to hear those helicopters fly over, and we would be to the place where we would begin to think, is this mine? Wow, could this be mine? This could mean good news for us. Yes, it could, but that's kind of selfish. You ought to be more considerate, as I often kind of checked myself and thought, you need to be praying for whoever this is and for their families. And the last thing you ought to consider is your need. But sometimes that's just not the case. For me, it wasn't the case. On occasion, you're kind of running in the house, waiting on the phone call, wondering if this is going to be it. I think that's somewhat selfish. Now, you may have a different opinion. Maybe you've never experienced that. I'm just admitting something that maybe you've not thought about, or maybe some of us haven't, at least. Now, number 6, this is one that I saw on a Facebook group that honestly I hadn't thought about, but I know I've experienced, and that's the emotion of being homesick. Especially when you're in and out of the hospital, as many of us are, in and around time of transplant. It doesn't take very long of those, as seems standard for me, those 8-day plus hospital stays. And I've stayed for more than a month in different situations, but on average, I kind of stayed 8 days at a time, so a little bit more than a week at a time. It didn't take me long at all to get homesick, to want to be home with my family, to want to be back around my friends, not to be laying in the hospital bed, homesick for my bed, for my food, for my clothing, whatever. And it's just, that's so normal. As a matter of fact, I saw a video just tonight. One of the people I mentioned just a couple of weeks ago, Mark Johnson. I think you could look, and maybe I'll link it in the corner, a video I did where I congratulated Mark Johnson on his transplant. Mark Johnson got to come home today. And there's a little video that he or his wife, one, put up today of him getting in the car, and as he's pulling his seatbelt across himself to buckle it, you can see tears welling up in his eyes and starting to run down his face, because I know he'd been so homesick. He'd been in the hospital for so long, waiting on this gift for so long. I know part of that was his appreciation, his gratefulness, and all we'll get to later, but some of that was just, he was homesick. He wanted to go home, and I'm glad he did, by the way. But nonetheless, being homesick. Number next, I think about, and this really has to do with kind of, and a few of these will right now, with kind of getting the call. When you get the call that there's a possible match and you need to come to the hospital, or if you're there in the hospital, at least they come in like they did with me and say there's a possible match, so get ready, get prepared. There's a sense of excitement. And by excitement, I won't even use the word elation. I think that's a pretty close word too, but being excited, to get the possibility of a new leash on life, to have a new opportunity, a new chance at life, that's something that, maybe some of us didn't think would ever occur. At least in my life, I had lived 30 some odd years of my life to some extent in heart failure. Now, I had a corrective surgery as I was a baby, but I lived to some extent in my life always in heart failure. So I'd never really known a normal or typical average life, activity-wise. And so to have the opportunity to transplant and to finally kind of get that call, if you will, that was exciting, not only for me, but for my friends, my family. I've even put up videos about what to do with the call and social media, which probably not the best idea to release too much information too quickly, or at least to do it yourself. You can refer to that video likewise, but I'll assure you, if you put on social media, I'm headed in for transplant, or I'm headed to surgery, or they found a match, everyone who posts beneath your post or who comments beneath your post will be excited, because it's an exciting time, and that's a part of what goes along with that. I think another word that goes beside that would be happiness. Happy again for the opportunity, happy again for the chance at life, happy, as the way one character on television puts it. And I think that's kind of where we all get and where we should be. And then that's, a good emotion. Number next on the list, at least what I kind of jotted down here, and these, by the way, I'll say again, these are not in any particular order. I'm just kind of going through them logically for me, but the feeling of gratitude or gratefulness. And again, if you go back and look at that Facebook post I put up and all those comments, this one came through over and over and over again, because certainly as a transplant recipient myself, and you likewise, if you already had one, or even if you haven't, you're looking ahead, you're thinking ahead to the day when you might get that transplant. You already know you're going to be grateful for that. You're going to be so thankful for, again, the chance, the opportunities at life, for the new leash on life. There are so many things already in only 4.5 years post that I've experienced that I know without a transplant I would have not been able to experience. I would not have seen. I would not have been a part of this part or that part of my life. And I'm just grateful for it. Just so thankful for that chance. And so that's a part of what goes along with that. Now, again, kind of around the same vein, maybe around the time of receiving the call or the actual days of transplant, there may be excitement and happiness and gratefulness. There's also going to be a period of sadness, And that's where you really just kind of settle in and say, yes, I received a gift, but at the cost of someone else. Now, if you receive a gift from a living donor like many kidney patients do, that's wonderful. That's great. And that is a awesome thing that can be done. But many of us, again, receive our gifts from deceased donors, and maybe your kidney, liver, whatever came that way, but all hearts, all lungs come from deceased donors. And so there's got to be a level of sadness where you think, yes, for all the opportunity I'm receiving, I'm gaining, there's a loss somewhere, and there's a tremendous loss somewhere. We're aware of that, but it's hard to really accept that. It's hard to let that kind of hit home. I can remember, and I'll just give you a personal example. When I did receive the call, Jim, there's a potential match. I ran through in my mind, okay, there's a potential match, so I'm going to potentially get that transplant really soon. In my mind, I ran through the things I knew about transplant, which was that, for example, the heart was only viable outside of the donor body for 5 hours. So I thought, we'll do the math. In 5 hours, I'll be in the OR. And then time passed, and it passed, and it passed, and I wasn't going to the OR, and I started thinking, how is this possible? How is this happening? Well, the truth is it's oftentimes happening in that case because on the other end there's a family who's got a loved one who's had an accident, who's became ill, maybe suddenly ill, and they're having to make a decision on that end whether to let them go or not, whether to let them, leave this life. And that's got to make you sad. That's just got to destroy you to consider the loss that some other family, some other group of people are having, not at your expense, but for your good. And that's what's happening here. So sadness is certainly one of them. I think right behind that, and I'll put it beneath it, but there's guilt sometimes, and this is an emotion that I hear about over and over again. It's not one I think that we should be feeling, but I think it's one that we generally do. And that is, I got a new heart or lungs, liver, kidney, whatever, and I feel guilty for it. Why did I get this? Why did someone die? Why did this gift come to me? Why did this gift come to me and not someone else? I know while I was in the hospital, just on that latter part of that, there were several. I mean, I was on a whole floor full of people either waiting for or having just received transplants, the majority waiting for transplants, and everybody on that floor was in dire need, if you will. They were struggling for life, and all of us, just anticipating the potential of transplant and praying for that potential of transplant. And then I was the one on May 23rd, 2013 that got the transplant, not the guy down the road, or not the guy down the hall, not the woman across the row there on the other side of the wing. It was me. And so maybe some guilt from that, and then the guilt again from that family who lost their loved one. Well, consider that their loved one, was going to pass, or at least did pass, and that maybe by you receiving the gift, you're going to be their first means of healing, or their first means of comfort, or their first means of making an attachment to the loved one that they lost. And I think that helps to relieve that guilt. But I think it's something that we all experience. Maybe you haven't, maybe you have, but that's sometimes a part of our lives. Next, again, kind of beneath that, kind of similar, but what about regret? Not just regret over, okay, someone someone maybe died, or someone had to give up one of their kidneys, or someone did this or that for me. But in my case, I'll be totally honest with you. When you're going through, especially that initial healing process, and I've seen this is so different for every one of us. The recovery process is so very different. But when you're going through that initial healing process, I can remember many a day after for that matter, while I was still in the hospital, especially that period right after I got out of the hospital, when your pain's not managed quite like you would hope, and when you're back at home having to deal with your situation and kind of do for yourself a little more, I can remember the regret, thinking, why did I do this? Although I was in stage 4 heart failure and given only a few months to live, or days toward the end of that, I can remember thinking, why didn't I just stick with the heart I had and take my chances and just work this thing out? Just let nature take its course, someone would say. Let God do what he wanted to with me. Because sometimes I had days that were so bad, or I felt so bad, and in the last program we discussed that. I'll put it up here in the corner and link it below. But I felt so bad that I thought I'd made a mistake. Well, I can tell you, as far as the 4.5 years right now I've been given since transplant, it's been no mistake at all. But you kind of feel that way. So there's some regret sometimes. But here's some more positive things to get into. What about determination? I've told people over and over again, if they're going to survive transplant and to do it in a good way, to live the best life that they can, as I say in every program sometimes toward the end, I will tonight, by the way, but I say stay stronger, friends, stay stronger. It's going to take determination. They're going to have to, and I'm going to have to continue to do my part to heal, my part to recover, my part to survive. And, if that's nothing more than making sure I take my medications on time, every time, the right time, if it means nothing more than adjusting my diet, adjusting my exercise program, making good decisions, good choices, just knowing my body, all the topics I've discussed already, it takes determination to do that. It takes being able to fight through something. And I've got several friends, close friends in the transplant world. One I'm thinking of right now who's in the hospital. Joni is in the hospital right now tonight. And she's been in and out of the hospital since transplant. Many difficulties. Again, she's extremely thrilled and happy to have a transplant, but like many people I know, have had a lot of struggles since transplant, and she has to be determined. We have to be determined to continue this fight. So it's a part of what we experience. Determination needs to be there. Next, I'm on 14. I don't know how to count this otherwise. I've subheaded and sideheaded many, but 14. What about satisfaction? Now, this is one that you may find a minute after transplant, a week after transplant, a year after transplant. And I tell people sometimes face to face, you may not feel back at yourself really for a year. And of course that depends. Hearts are different than lungs are different than kidneys, and all that. But for me personally, as a heart transplant patient, I was a year post-transplant before I really felt totally back to what I would call normal. Now, did I feel better? I felt better when I woke up. I looked better. Everything about me. My hands, for the first time in a long time, my hands and my feet were warm. I mean, I had color to my face. All these things were different. But it took about a year for me to recover to the point where, my chest didn't hurt anymore. And I felt comfortable. Not that I didn't have the strength, but I felt comfortable moving about. And again, I still have bad days, but being satisfied. Now, this is the life I live. This is the way I live. And I'm satisfied with that. I don't have to be any stronger. And I hope I don't get any weaker, but I don't have to be any stronger. But if I do get weaker, if I do go back into heart failure, if I do start struggling, I can deal with that too. I'm satisfied with what I have. So that's kind of a emotion that needs to occur. Maybe it hasn't occurred yet in your life, but I hope that it will. Next, how about indebtedness? Now, obviously, you would assume I'm going with that, being indebted to your donor family. There's no doubt that is a typical, average, need-be emotion. I've been in contact with my donor family pretty much from the beginning. As soon as they made contact with me, I already reached out to them, but they made contact with me. The gates were open, and we've been talking back and forth on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, at least me and the donor's mother. I love Miss Louise, I've mentioned before. Like she's always been there with me and always will be. But I'm not really talking about that type of indebtedness, although I'm indebted to them for their donation, for their family's donation, because they made the ultimate decision in the moment, not the donor himself, not my actual donor, Dickie, but they made that decision. But I'm talking about being indebted to the transplant community. You know, I will never forget the care that I got pre-transplant from all of my doctors, and I won't go through and try to name them all, but from my coordinators. I will name them because so far I've only had two, so it's easier. But from Ian Dibble at UAB, awesome pre-transplant coordinator. From Connie Bowen, post-transplant, amazing post-transplant coordinator. From my other doctors, you know, out there, I'm trying not to name them. I could. They're about 7 or 8, but, you know, awesome care, and I'm indebted to them. But I'm also indebted, and this is why I've spent these 4+ years going and sitting down, hopefully many times face to face with patients. And it's why I'm doing this video series now, because I'm trying to find a way to give back. I'm trying to reach back out and say, you know, I want to help. I want to advocate, educate, and motivate other transplant patients like yourself and like all that I can reach. Feeling indebted. I see so many people on Facebook. Mark A. Barber is one I mentioned last week in my program. Mark A. Barber does so much, and he's just a little over a year out, and he's been struggling lately. He's even in the hospital tonight, but been struggling a little bit, but he gives back so much. He goes on these charity rides. He's a cyclist. He goes on these charity rides. He appears in these, what do you call it? But he's always a part, and many of my Facebook friends are. They're always a part of these organ donation sign-ups and all these things they can do to reach out. Feeling indebted, I think you will. So that's a great thing to be part of, to feel indebted and to do something about it. Next, and by the way, I got a show I did on that called Pay It Forward. I'll link to that. But anyway, what about the sense of renewal? Realizing that you are new. You've been given that new leash on life. You feel new, and that takes some healing time, but you feel new, and so you're happy to be there. This is one that I really hadn't thought about, although I feel it, but I hadn't really thought about till I saw it come up on one of those Facebook posts where someone said, you know what, I feel like a brand new person. Yeah, that's renewal. That's being made over. That's that new leash, that new chance on life. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And then finally here, this last one here, which I've numbered 17. I think it would actually be 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 24 or so. But number 17, amazement. That is just amazed at the whole process, amazed that it's possible to transplant, amazed that the recovery is possible, amazed at the life that you have. That goes along with all that we've listed, especially the gratitude, the thankfulness, the happiness, the excitement, but being amazed that this can even be possible. Modern medicine that's been available now since the 80s and that gets better every day, is a wonderful thing. And the blessing that God has given us as humans to make these discoveries and to have these recoveries is a wonderful thing. Now, again, if you've listened to this whole program, I thank you so much for it. Thanks so much, or I'm so thankful for all of you that have subscribed to the channel, that watch these programs, that share these things. I'm so appreciative to you. It allows me to do my small part to potentially help you and to help anyone you might share these or show these to, for that matter. But it may be the case today that you went through the list with me and you thought, yeah, I've experienced this and this and this, but not that or not that. Again, my statement of disclaimer, I understand that. We're all different. We all experience things different. And with these being emotions, they're certainly going to be different. But I hope that this has helped you in some small way. And if it has, again, like, subscribe, and share. And if you would, go ahead and comment below. I'd love to see more comments coming in beneath this video where you let me know, okay, Jim, this is what I experienced, and this is how it is different or maybe very much the same as what you discussed. I'm just so thankful for this opportunity to discuss this. Again, this is the emotional experience, and I encourage you, always do what you can to live, and especially at this point, to stay stronger, friends. Thank you.